Welcome to Your Unapologetic Life, the podcast. I'm your host, Morgan Barkis, your go-to women's empowerment coach here to help you reclaim your confidence and sparkle after a breakup. I'm excited to share my high-impact free video training. It's called Bounce Back Quick, 5 Confidence Boosters After a Breakup, filled with actionable strategies to help you take control and feel empowered again. To get this free video, visit morganbarkis.com and subscribe to my email list, or click the link in the show notes. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Let me introduce the listener to this beautiful woman in front of me. Jessica Hammock is passionate about heart, mind, and body wellness. She endeavors to teach others about emotional and mental health, helping them unwind the treasure from the trauma to walk in the truth of their identity and empowering them to break free of what is holding them back to nurture the best versions of themselves. Jessica is the founder of Vibrant Voice, coaching, consulting, and counseling. Jessica serves as an identity breakthrough coach, licensed trauma specialist, podcast host, speaker, and author. She holds an MS in counseling and has 20 years of experience in education, where she has done everything from classroom teacher to assistant principal. She is currently the director of behavioral and mental health, serving 100 campuses and 25,000 students. Jessica, wow. Round of applause for you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Yes, I'm excited.
That is a heck of a bio. Before we dive into too many questions, I would love to meander through your story. I mean, you've done a lot of things, and then landed with trauma specifically, and also this other really extensive background. So please share as much as of your story that you would like to.
Yeah. I started out with the plan that I was going to get married and stay home and have kids and just be a mom. And God and the universe were like, that's really funny. You think that's how that's going to go down? The backup plan was to go get a teaching degree, because I was like, listen, the world will always need teachers in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
So if something ever happens to this fabulous husband I'm going to marry, I could still provide for my kids. That's how that started. And God was like, yeah. So probably that's not going to happen in that order, in that way, shape, or form at all. So let's stick with this education thing. And so I became a school teacher, and I found that it didn't matter how amazing I became at teaching math to 5th graders. There was still a lot of stuff in the way. And I was like, this is not cool at all. Like, I had trauma from 5th grade math for just not being able to compute. I didn't have a great teacher. And I thought that was the thing to fix it, is just like my own mindset, my own positive energy, like reframing how they thought about math would be enough. And then learning the behavior management and classroom skills and all that stuff. And it just wasn't. And I was like, well, what gives? And I realized it truly was their trauma story and how they thought and felt about themselves that was in the way. And so I decided to go back to school for counseling. I did find a husband in the middle of all that, and he had his own traumatic brain injury. So I was like, oh, maybe this will work in my own life. And also, we were in the middle of a journey with infertility. So I didn't even have my own kids to like devote time to. So I got my counseling degree and ended up I was working in a school system that didn't have counselors. So I just said like, hey, like, will you try me out? Like, will you just like give me a shot? And so they did it first, and then they're like, okay, we like what we see, so we'll let you do that. At first it was part-time, and then they were like, okay, full-time. And then all of a sudden it's like I'm in charge of a program and I have people under me. And I learned a lot about trauma and how it works, and got a lot of clinical experience in a private practice setting in other areas. And it's helped me navigate my own life, my own trauma of being married to somebody with a traumatic brain injury and having a 10-year journey with infertility and all that stuff. And it's just, I consider myself somebody who shows up to help people like really find, I think when we all have versions of trauma that we experience, because trauma is an injury to our nervous system. It's not a disorder. That's a whole nother story part that I can go into. But when we think of injuries have the capacity to heal. But the part that we don't tend to heal is that part of our identity that is the sparkle and the treasure piece of us, like the good qualities. we think so many people I meet feel like this brokenness afterwards instead of recognizing like who they are and the value they bring to the table, whether that's a kid in fifth grade who struggles to learn math, or, you know, a 45-year-old woman who's like, listen, I've had all this stuff happen to me and I don't even know who I am anymore and what kind of shampoo I like.
I'm so glad you said that, because I've shifted my focus of my coaching, absolutely working with women, working with confidence. And the short time I was a therapist, I thought, you know, my best work and where I felt the most alive in my work was when I was working with women who had gotten out of emotionally and or physically abusive relationships, and they were finding their confidence again. They were rebuilding their life. They were figuring out how to set boundaries, what they wanted, what they needed.
Mm-hmm.
Were they ready for a next relationship? What would that look like? What were they wanting to attract into their life and all that? So I say all that because that'll be the focus that most of my questions will be about women. And when you think trauma, you think like today, sadly, we got diverted through an intersection because there was a gentleman that got hit by a car who was on a motorcycle. That's trauma in that physical way that you mentioned. And so much of our trauma can be emotional and we don't even know where it came from. I remember after a breakup, I went immediately, I'm like, got into therapy and we started talking about attachment theory and I was like, oh, you know, there's things that you don't even realize are there. So I wanted to ask you about trauma, specifically emotional, mental, and some people minimize theirs because they're like, oh, I wasn't neglected. I wasn't starved. I wasn't beaten. I wasn't sexually abused. And so, yeah, there are the big and little T traumas, and it's all trauma and it lives in us and it lives in our psyche. Dive in wherever you feel you want.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that. Generationally, I see it so different. So the boomers have a different version of what they think trauma is. They tell that story. I wasn't abused. I wasn't beaten. I had food. I had clothing, you know. But this is what I say to people is trauma is anytime our nervous system feels unsafe and we're not able to talk about it and process it and get back to safety.
I love that.
And
Can you
everybody's
say it?
like,
Okay.
cute,
Yes,
like
yes.
all the things, right?
Yes, I want you to
So,
please say that again. Say it again, because that is like,
yeah, anytime our nervous system feels unsafe and it tells us that we're not safe and we're not able to talk about it and process it and get back to safety.
And to be honest, right in my head right now, I'm thinking of a time when I was a kiddo and a time as a 40-year-old woman breaking up with someone and not being able, like, feeling really dysregulated. So it can happen at any age, I'm assuming.
At any age. And here's the two most common ones that people have no idea are a trauma response. When you go to the gas station and you're thinking about, oh, I wonder how expensive gas is. Well, what if I drive across town and if it's 5 cents cheaper over there, how much more can I get in my car? And some people would say, well, that's just being frugal, right? No, the rich and famous people that have well regulated nervous systems have no care in the world whether they save 5 cents, 10 cents, or $3 on their gas because they don't have a money trauma that says, I'm unsafe or I will be in an unsafe scenario. And this comes from parents who are like, well, I don't know how much gas prices are. Gas prices are going up. Are we going to have enough gas to get across town or to go to work or to do this thing? Let's go over here. No, we can't drive there. We can't do this. All those stories of we can't do this. This can't happen. Gas is too expensive. I don't know how we're going to afford this. Lands itself as a money trauma. So then we find ourselves scrolling through the gas app to find the cheapest cents, and it's 0.2 cents cheaper 20 miles away, and we're willing to calculate how far can I drive to save the amount of cents to. That's a money trauma that's anchored in our system. We received, so we're very concrete and black and white in our thinking up until about the age of 10. And because of that factor, we receive information from the conversations our parents have, even if they don't directly say it. So the stories that we received is, well, we're not going to be cared for. Our needs aren't going to be met. We don't have money for gas. So-and-so can't go to work, or we can't do this extra thing because we got to save the extra gas money to go to work or whatever. The second place it shows up is when you're buying groceries. And so, you know, I mean, now there's the thing without being political, there's just inflation, right? And what cost $152 now costs $692. But if you're walking up to the thing to swipe your card and your heart starts palpitating, like, is there going to be money there? Am I going to go broke? Can I even buy this? What can I buy? Can I buy the brand name? That is a trauma about food and money that your body has held on to. And it could be because you haven't rewired your money story. It could be because you were told as a kid, we can't afford this, or we're not buying brand names. We're only buying the generic stuff. It comes from those places where as children, we felt unsafe or not fully cared for, and we didn't know why. Why can't we buy this? Like, what's going to happen if we buy this,
Well, I'm
So,
assuming even the energy of the parents as they're saying that, or if you're in a
yeah,
relationship and someone's saying something and you're feeling a certain kind of way, like you said, with your nervous system, and you don't have words for it, that
yeah,
energy goes somewhere.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, there's a difference between saying we can't afford that versus we choose not to spend our money on that. So, yes, you can have a budget, you can have a way to allocate your money, and your kid wants ice cream every night, and you're like, we're not spending money on that. Or we're not spending money on that versus like we choose to allocate our money differently is a different place that lands in the nervous system differently. It implies that there's a choice in the actions. Or we can't afford ice cream every night. You get one treat a week, and tonight's your night. We can't afford it versus we choose to spend differently lands different in us. And so it's those subtle things. People can have learning trauma just by the way the teacher talked about how they performed on an assignment, on a test, in a group. And so automatically we perceive our outcomes have to be a certain way because we didn't navigate through the learning experience well. So many things impact us when our nervous system gets signals that we're in danger or there's a perceived threat, a threat to our love and belonging, a threat to our survival, like our food, clothing, and shelter, our threat to our freedom, even a threat to our fun. When we perceive there's a threat there, and that's going to be impacted, our nervous system becomes dysregulated. If we don't talk about it, acknowledge it, process it, acknowledge what was hard about it, what was difficult, what we would like to feel, what we want to see the outcomes, then that can be the trauma that starts running in the background of our lives.
So we know where it happens, how it happens. It can be generational.
Yeah.
And it's sitting there in your body. How do you work with folks? And again, just selfishly, particularly women, if they're in relationships and they haven't been healthy and they don't want to continue those kind of patterns, where do they start digging around and finding out and then changing that as a matter of self-talk and restoring things? Or how do you work with folks to step away from or out of that trauma thinking?
Yeah. The first thing I ask them is, what are things you like to do? And so many times the answer is, I don't know. And the reason is not that they don't know. The reason goes back to I gave that piece of myself away because I wanted to feel safe and comfortable in these relationships. So I sacrificed little things along the way that I enjoyed because it felt easier in the relationship. And I did my own damage control ahead of time. I'm not going to say I like to go to this restaurant for this food because I know the other person, my partner, doesn't like that. So I'll just say it doesn't really matter, or you choose, or it's fine. And it's those little things along the way that we start giving away. And then it gets to the point where it's like somebody's like, well, what is it that you like? What is it you prefer? I don't know. Whatever you want is fine. It'll be fine. It's no big deal. But see, that is a big deal because we've betrayed ourselves with little decisions along the way. So it's starting exploring, what is it do I like? And am I willing to advocate for that little thing? I have a woman who wanted to use, literally, in the relationship she was in, got in trouble for using more than a pump and a half of shampoo. And once she got out of her relationship and was in the healing process, she had this epiphany one day in the shower, and she's like, I just pumped like 50 pumps and said, screw you. But it was this place where she came to that she's like, I get to own this decision. If I need 3 pumps of shampoo, I'm going for it and it'll be fine. You know? So I think it's looking at where in my life do I have likes and dislikes, and have I given those choices or those opportunities away to where have I sacrificed myself for the perceived safety of the relationship? And healing begins starting by us making those choices in a relaxed body setting. So when we're relaxed in our body, we can make those decisions. I'm going to choose to go to this restaurant because it feels good, or I'm going to choose to buy myself a coffee today because I want one. And we're relaxed. It sends a signal to us that this is a safe choice for us. And because we can make it in safety, that's how our nervous system heals.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I start. What do you like?
And I love that, because it's one of the things when I coach women and they're out of this relationship and they're realizing, what do I like to do? What do I want to do again?
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, get little wins and or take your power back in any way you can. There's a lot of things in this life that we don't have control of.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of things in our life that we get to control. We get to control our thoughts that become feelings. We get to control our behavior, what we choose, how do we choose to move our body. And anyway, I was thinking about books. I love resources. And you and I have connected prior to this recording, and you had mentioned a couple books, and I would love for you to dive in. I love books. I have so many books. And I think it's just, whether it's audio or you're reading and highlighting, it's a very great way, alongside therapy or coaching, to understand trauma better and get other people's perspectives. So what are some of your favorite resources, and tell us about that?
I'm a complete nerd. So I may say stuff today I didn't even remember I said before. So if you have other
Right.
things, you'll be like, what about this? One of the favorite ones that I have is Gabor Mate's When the Body Says No.
Okay. Say more.
I think it tells a great story. He tells great stories about how people sacrifice their voice in a variety of different stories, and how the body held on to that trauma, and how dis-ease was created because of the stored trauma, which lent itself to diseases in the body. Cancer, sicknesses, illnesses, so much of that is unresolved emotional stuff that we have not advocated for ourselves or talked about things. And there's a lot of scientific research and studies on this idea that 80 to 90% of disease pathways, syndromes, illnesses, cancer, sicknesses are because of unresolved emotions, where we haven't talked about our truth. We haven't worked through forgiveness. We haven't learned to embrace the truth of who we are, what we think, feel, and believe, and how we want to move forward in life.
That is a very high number, Jessica. You need to say the name of that book again. What is it called?
Yeah, so When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And you had mentioned another one, Feelings Buried Alive Never Die. You and I specifically wrote that one down.
Yeah. And so that's an extension of that same concept. But the difference is that one actually talks about specific emotions or specific body locations, and how we hold on, if you're experiencing pain or disruption or sickness or illness, what is the emotionally or conceptually being stored in that. So we hold on to anger in our liver. So for most people, in Eastern medicine, they look at you having what we call a circadian rhythm about your day. And your body, I kind of describe it like this. Like we have a little street sweeper going through our body all throughout the day, kind of cleaning up systems and organs, right? And the street sweepers are in our liver from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. And so if there's any liver issues, insulin issues, glucose, all that stuff, right? But the liver holds on to anger. So unresolved anger and frustration, if you're holding on to that and you haven't worked through it, how it happens is you tend to wake up between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. when it's doing its processing. And I know sometimes we're like, yeah, I just drank too much too late. No, your body can actually hold on to that in a bladder scenario. But if you find yourself consistently waking up between 1 and 3 a.m., you need to start to ask your question, who am I ticked off at? Because once you work through that and release the anger, a lot of times your body will be able to rest through that process. Grief is in our lungs, and we typically, that does its little cleaning between 3 and 5 a.m. So if people wake up a lot of times maybe with coughing or unable to breathe or panic attacks early in the morning between 3 and 5 a.m., a lot of time it's tied to the fact that there might be unresolved grief held in their body. In fact, if somebody's listening right below your collarbones on the outside, closest to your shoulders here, if you push on those and they feel tender and painful right underneath there and underneath that collarbone right at the outside, if it feels tender and tight and painful, that could be stored grief in your system.
So what you're telling me is that not only are certain organs affected and or body parts, it affects your sleep, which then also doesn't really help you stay healthy in the long run
Yeah.
either. So it could affect like
Right.
literally how your body functions. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Back pain. So much of chronic pain is our threat bucket in our brain that's too full. Pain is a receptor in our system, and it's a receptor that our threat bucket in terms of like what we perceive as threatening or dangerous to us is overfull. So when we begin to resolve what we feel is threatening or not safe to us, and we move that bucket down, the pain in our system begins to resolve itself.
Okay. So we've got 2 books. Anything else you want to share?
There's another really good one called A Changed Mind by David Bayer, Bayer. He talks really a lot about the power of what we're thinking and how we have a belief system. Our thoughts are tied to our belief system. Our feelings come as a result of our thoughts, and then our actions are tied to those things, which anchor in that whole cycle. So if we're really trying to change our mind, he gives really practical, simple steps on just changing our mind and how to anchor in a new belief system. So, best way I've ever heard it explained, most concise. He's been around the world, done the work, been with all the gurus, all the different things, and he has a really powerful way of putting it. Some great free resources with the book, and I think it gives some really practical, simple steps people can use to just truly rewire their brain while they're anchoring in those nervous system regulation. And he has a podcast too called A Changed Mind that supports it for different concepts. And he does life concepts, business concepts, relationships, all the things. So he's very diverse from that aspect of things.
Say you're working with someone and they say, hey, when I think about this, I start to feel a certain kind of way. I'm getting emotionally dysregulated. Kind of walk us through how you help them. I mean, change their thoughts, but they're having the thought. Now they're having the feeling. Like, what's the process you walk them through to help them?
First thing is to regulate your body. When you're in a trauma response or what we call flight or fight, your body goes there because it perceives that you're in danger, that there's a threat to you. So it's hard to rewire your thinking or get yourself to a place of calm if your body is sending signals that you're in danger, that a bear is chasing you. Okay. So short breath in, long breath out, doing some cycles of that. Imagine you're blowing out 100 candles on Aunt Jane's birthday cake, right? So continuing to do that, a couple patterns, your nervous system, your whole body will shift. It'll feel like it decompresses. It just sinks down and relax. When you notice that shift, that's when you begin to approach it. Because what happens is your logic and reasoning center in your brain is in your prefrontal cortex at the very front part of your brain. When you're in true threat or danger, that system is bypassed. So we can't access logic and reasoning because our body thinks that we're running from a bear. It doesn't want to know what color the bear is, how big the bear is, if the bear has a family, where the bear grew up, what the bear had for lunch. It doesn't care about any of that stuff. We don't need it. But in order for us to actually be able to change our mind and move forward and heal from trauma, we have to do it in a relaxed setting. And then the second thing is, what am I thinking, feeling, and believing right now? And acknowledge it. So then I say, write all that stuff down, get it out, because now we have something like, it's kind of like a Google database. Your brain did a bunch of Googling to figure out how to solve the problem while you were running from the bear. And now you've got 16 million hits of information in your brain, and you're like, what do I even do with this stuff? And that's where all these thoughts go running wild and all that stuff. So after you've calmed your body, you've relaxed your body, then you need to look at, how do I get all this stuff out of my head? Write it down. Good, bad, ugly, indifferent. You're not giving it to anybody. Don't put it in a journal to keep or process. Put it on a piece of paper. Relax your body. And then I will say from there, it's really important to look at how you are processing those thoughts that are in your mind. So getting them out on paper, the good, bad, and the ugly. I call it a brain dump. You don't want to hold the energy of those things by keeping them. So after you're done, tear them up and throw it away. If you don't do well writing, we all have these great phones, and every phone has on it something called a voice memo. So take it out, hit record, and act like you're talking to the person you need to say all the things to. And say it. The good, bad, and ugly, and different. If you need to get in your car and drive down the road and yell and scream and curse and do whatever you need to do, do that. But the point is, your heart and your mind don't know the difference of whether or not that person's sitting in front of you or not. But you've released the words and the energy attached to those things. And sometimes that comes with an emotional release. You're saying, I acknowledge you. I acknowledge this is hard and it's difficult, and I have dysregulation around it. And so you're getting it out of your system. It's kind of like clearing your browser history. And then when that's finished, sitting down and saying, what is my vision? Who do I want to be? What do I want to think, feel, and believe? And how do I move forward in that? What action steps do I want to take? Because you're doing it in a relaxed way. You've gotten all the stuff out, and you most often can connect back to your thinking, logic, and reasoning brain. And whatever goals you have set with your coach, your therapist, or whatever you're doing in your life, you can reconnect to that energy and vision of, this is what I want my life to look like, sound like, and feel like. This is how I want to feel confident. This is how I want to heal. It's difficult to access those thoughts and decisions if we've got all that emotional energy in the way, or we're feeling unsafe in our body.
Let's rewind, because I'm thinking of, and if you have an example, like someone you've worked with that you can share a story, I'm thinking about women walking around who something comes up, they're triggered, they're feeling a certain kind of way, and again, they're not identifying it as trauma. They're like,
Right.
like you said, I haven't been abused, I wasn't starved, I wasn't neglected, I don't have any
Right.
trauma. Like, how do women start to recognize when they're feeling certain things and then going, wait a second, and how do they start to identify that they even have any trauma?
A lot of times it's little annoyances that we find. Like if we find ourselves going to the grocery store and we by default pick up the generic, and as we pick up the generic name, we have like this cuss string running low key in the back of our mind. It's like, damn, so and so, why can't I pick this up? And I just really want the brand name, and I don't even. That's a sign of a trauma, right? There's a little bit of dysregulation there. If we find ourselves in a fear or an anxious state about doing something, so I had a woman who it was really important to her to go to church, and she would take her Bible. She was very creative. She had all these different color highlighters. She would highlight and draw in it. And as she started to do that, what started to run in the back of her mind was what her partner would say about how she wasn't good enough and why was she doing that, and she was distracted and clearly she wasn't getting the message and she wasn't learning things. And she's like, I'm sitting here and I'm feeling guilty for something that I enjoy. That tells me you have a dysregulated nervous system around that particular activity, and you've picked up some really unhelpful information that you've said is true when in fact it's not. And so she was dysregulated and feeling like, am I going to get in trouble for this thing? If you have that thought or feeling, am I going to get in trouble for this thing? Am I going to fall apart? Am I going to make it? What are they going to think, say, or feel? And that runs a lot. There's probably some trauma tied to that thing. And so then how do you get to a place where you can sort of rewire some of that stuff? So for her, we talked about going and buying a whole new set, a Bible and some pens and highlighters that were for her now where she's at post relationship to be this new starting place that had new energy attached to it. And she could anchor it in how she needed to for her own life and health and safety.
I like that. I want to stick with the relationship track a little and talk to you about how trauma influences our relationships and women who want to have healthier relationships. What advice would you give them?
I think anytime you find yourself making decisions where you're sacrificing things for the good of the relationship or where you have to justify their behaviors to you, that's not a healthy relationship. So if you find yourself saying, "Oh, it's okay, it's no big deal this time. Like I don't mind. I had this plan, but but it's okay that we do it this way because this is the way he wants to do it or it's just easier." If you find yourself in a consistent pattern of saying this is just easier to do it this way, you're headed down the path of trauma. And that's not a healthy relationship because it is a give and take. It is a partnership together. And there may need to be some healing in a beginning relationship. Even how do you do that communication, right? But if you're constantly making little decisions to sacrifice to make it easier, you have begun engaging in a pattern of sacrificing who you are. And there will come a point in time, this idea of it's just easier this way, or it's just easier if we do it this way, is making decisions from a dysregulated nervous system. If you're making those decisions from a dysregulated nervous system, you are acting in a trauma state. And so it's really anchoring in when somebody asks me to do something or when we're going to approach an activity or a conversation, if I feel nervousness, anxiousness, some kind of tension in my body, am I even aware of what's happening in my body? Because that's a signal to you that maybe there's still a past trauma story stuck there and you've misread what's happening. So it gives you an opportunity to go back to it and say, I would really like for us to actually do it this way. And if you see that they have a healthy response back to you and your body still reacts, like if you're afraid of their reaction or you hide things because you don't want them to react a certain way, that's your trauma pattern. But if they have a reaction that triggers unsafety in your body, that's not a healthy place to
I
be.
love that distinction. Thank you for making that distinction because you're right. Like even if the other person is securely attached or healthy or
Mm-hmm.
not triggered, you being afraid to say anything is coming from something from your past because someone else somewhere
Mm-hmm.
down the line had a reaction
Mm-hmm.
that makes you assume everyone's going to react that way.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was going to ask you if you had an example of how somebody they could have a great partner and still be afraid to say certain things because they of something that happened in the past and how to because I think with some people it's hard to identify, like how do you even find that that was the word you used, something about your past story or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like how do you start to uncover that when you really think I had a great childhood or I've had a great life? Like how do people even
Well,
try to uncover stuff like that?
so there's a couple things. We receive the stories about nurture and care from our mom and how what our mom did with money. So if your mom bought things and hid them in the closet and didn't tell your dad because she was afraid of what your dad would say,
Yeah.
or she did, that is one storyline I see a lot, is like, oh, that's been here for weeks, right? And tries to dismiss it because she doesn't want a visceral reaction from the dad or the partner. That is a story about money and how we receive love and care and nurture. And so we can look at, is this person that I'm in a relationship with, do I fear a reaction from them? Where did that start? Who is it connected to? But have they actually shown me evidence in the current scenario that they're going to react that way?
Sure.
So in that dating relationship, you can ask them questions like, so in the past, have you ever had somebody who's hid a purchase from you? How do you feel about that? And seeing how they react. You know, some great conversations I've heard along the way and really working with those new dating relationships is going a variety of places and watching how they interact when their guard may be down. How do they treat a waiter or waitress? How do they respond to their mom? Go play a competitive game with them of some sort, whether that's a video game or, tennis or pickleball or something, and see what happens when things don't go their way. Go with them on a place that you know will have a lot of traffic, foot traffic, and car traffic or vehicle traffic, and see how they respond to those people that aren't the perfect drivers. And then don't do that just on the first date, right? See what it's like in a variety of circumstances with this individual. Because how they react when the unexpected happens, that will be the way that they react when you do something they don't expect you to do. And so, in those places where we don't define expectations well, like what do you expect to do about purchases, money? Do we share money? Do we split money? How much can I spend without us having a discussion about our monies if we're sharing monies? Are you okay with $100 purchase, or do I have to run a $10 purchase by you? Okay, well, if I purchase something that's $99.99, what are you going to react to? And so you can tell their true reactions by getting in those places where things go in unexpected ways and how they interface with people. How do they talk to their mom? How do they talk to their dad if those people are still in their life? And if they're not, how do they talk about them? Because so many males have unresolved relationships tied to their mom, and a lot of times it gets projected onto the female. So are they able to recognize good relationships, a little boy energy that doesn't get healed because he didn't have a nurturing, caring relationship with his mom is going to show up in your relationship? And are you ready for his little boy energy?
Yeah, I like these tips and tricks for moving forward. And in terms of a inventory for women, I feel like a lot, like I said, a lot of us, I think we're like, we don't have any traumas. And like I feel like you're saying, just pay attention. Start thinking about when you feel certain things, something feels like you're dysregulated in some way. And then maybe, like you said, jotting it down and then thinking, what am I feeling? Or, what thought went through my mind? How did that make me feel? And maybe where did I think or feel this in the past that this might be connected to, that it's starting to come up?
Almost all of our trauma stories now are tied to something that we absorbed as a child that we didn't have the language to articulate what that was. So when we are looking for, like when you come across people pleasers who are looking for everybody else to feel good, this is what I had a conversation with a lady today. She's a lunch lady. She encountered a traumatic situation at her school that she works with. And we were talking about the fact that every day this one particular student comes in and they talk about how they're like, really? You made that today? Like, that's what you're giving us? And she made her identity about, and her peace and her regulation about their response to the food. And I said, listen, you are the value. Your product and service is the byproduct of that. That's the outcome, but you are the value. So if you start making other people's interactions with you about your product or your service and how they interact with that, you've misplaced your value. And so if we constantly look at other people's reactions to the things that we bring to the table, the goods and services we provide, the way we live our life, as opposed to who we are as a human, we've misplaced what we're looking for. And so when I have those conversations with her, I say, like, when was the first time that you felt like you weren't good enough by something that happened to you? And she's like, oh, well, if I think about it, like in fourth grade, we were in this group project and we were supposed to do this thing. And this is what I made. And this is what everybody else made in my group. And they hated what I did. Wow. And so automatically she believed she wasn't good enough because in fourth grade, these girls were like, yeah, that's not cool. You're not cool because you brought something terrible to the table. So it wasn't like this big thing, but we had to sit with it a moment. When was the first time you felt this sensation or you had this thought? Oh, well, when my cousin said such and such to me and or did this, like we were playing this game and they made this comment about girls who act this way are more well loved or whatever. And I wasn't like that. And so we get these little stories, these little pieces that tell us some version of somebody else's thought process. And we receive that as our truth. And we look for ways to justify or change who we are. But it goes back to that need of feeling love and belonging and acceptance. And we didn't have that need met in the way we thought we would. And so now we've changed who we are or altered who we are over time. And that is a trauma in our nervous system because now we're constantly recalibrating ourselves to feel better, to be more loved and seen and accepted. And we said who we are isn't good enough until I look like, act like, feel like, think like, do this thing.
Well, and then as you're talking both those stories, I'm thinking, says who? Like these were just some random people, their opinion, their perspective. And like you said, that person took it on as their truth. And I had an incident in third grade, same thing, where someone said something to me that was super flippant and random. And it stuck in my brain and this was one person's opinion about something that he didn't even need to have an opinion about. And I carried that around. It's bananas.
Yeah.
Wow. Would you say, because truly throughout our lives, people say things, react a certain way, and then we internalize it, we take that as truth. Would you say that 100% of people on this planet have some kind of little or big T trauma?
Yeah, because trauma is just an injury. That's all it is. It's an injury in the nervous system. It stays stuck as an injury and can grow as an injury when we don't talk about our story and feel the emotions in a relaxed setting. So our brain can split tracks. We have our narrative storyline memory and our emotional experiential memory. And so you will find some people that keep talking and keep talking. They keep telling the same dang story over and over. And you're like, please shut up. You know why that is? Is because their storyline in their brain is running on a track and they have not partnered it back with the emotional experiential part of that situation so that it can repair itself in the brain and file back away. So when they can relax their body and retell that story and allow themselves to let those emotional experiences come up in their system and still be safe, until they do that, they're going to keep just telling the story. There's some people that only feel the emotional part of it. They're disrupted all the time. They're angry, ticked off, super anxious, but they won't talk about anything that happened. I can't talk about it. Can't talk about it. Until they tell the story in some fashion or allow themselves to access that story part and work through talking through the parts of it with the emotions that they constantly feel, the brain will stay stuck. And it keeps pushing us towards doing that. Tell the story, feel the feelings in a relaxed body. It repairs the memory track, files away, and we can move forward, which is what is done in some of the deepest clinical work. And what happens a lot of times is the brain is we're always moving towards healing. And so, especially for women, they'll experience these emotions in a very cyclical time, i.e., their luteal phase of their cycle. It
Really?
always, it repatterns, it comes back up. Now we didn't get into this, but we can have trauma bonds to time. So if we broke up in March, we might have feelings in dysregulation in our body every March, and we might not be able to tell why. We're bound in time, so to speak, to March. And until we tell ourselves a new story, allow us to have some healing around that, even saying simple things like a prayer or some kind of release, like I release myself from this, I'm cutting myself off from this, kind of moving through this conversation to say, I'm disconnecting myself from negative things that I experienced in March, and I'm moving forward in this new healing and identity, and I'm no longer going to be bound to that trauma. Every March, you might continue to experience that. Some people have trauma bonds that come up in certain patterns, like every 5 years or every 10 years, or so you can be bound to time. You can be bound to, a month of the year, or you can be bound even to land. If you experience, like you mentioned, the motorcycle accident, that person might have a trauma bond to land, that every time they drive past that thing in the future, their body feels nervous and dysregulated and they feel anxious. That's a trauma bond to land. And so it's moving through there, or being in that land in a safe setting, sort of being regulated and allowing themselves to acknowledge what they're thinking, feeling, and believing, being willing to maybe talk about it. And there's some things you can do just by even looking in a mirror. There's a whole technique we can get, like, that you can, they call it revisioning therapy, but you put a picture of yourself or of the person next to you, and you look in a mirror with that thing next to you, and you talk about what it was like before. And our brain can jump the trauma timeline after that happens. But before that, if we're stuck in emotional thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, sometimes prolonged grief, that our brain is not passing the trauma timeline in terms of like ego and identity. So I think as you move forward in life, being aware of, so many women are not aware of what they're feeling in their body. Like, is their heart palpitating? Are they feeling angst in their stomach? Does their emotional cycle change? They were fine. Everything was great. And all of a sudden, all this stuff comes up. And they're like, I thought I did healing around this. And you might have done layers of it, but especially around our luteal phase. And here's what I'll say is bleeding or not. So our emotional cycle has the same energy pattern to it every 28 days. It keeps recycling. Whether we are in perimenopause or menopause, we still experience emotional cycles. And so being aware that we'll have an ebb and flow of our physical energy and our emotional energy, and this stuff's coming back up. Do I want to heal this trauma bond I have to time, to money, to a concept like learning, to, money, to business, to whatever? It could be trauma bonds to other things or even other people. And so it's recognizing what is my body feeling and what am I thinking, feeling, and believing about it.
This might be a silly question, and I'm thinking about, like, if you have debt, let's say, and you've got all these little debts, and then you tackle the little ones and like knock off some to feel some wins. When it comes to trauma, and let's say someone's really done an inventory and said, wow, okay, so I've got this happened. I broke up with somebody a year ago. So, or let's say 5 years ago. So every, like you said, March, these feelings start coming up. That's why, because 5 years ago, and this is happening. That's cyclical. Now we're talking cycle. Certain feelings are coming up every month at this time, whatever it is. Should they tackle certain traumas at certain times, or all of them, or like the big ones first, and the like how do you process everything that you probably are holding on?
Yeah, I mean, we're always in cycles of healing. What I do know is there are some windows in the window of I'll have to look up real quick, but in March typically is what we call the window of reconciliation around family and relationships. So it doesn't mean that you can't tackle healing around family and relationships any other time. But if you know that there's like this extra measure of energy and support and spiritual connectivity, I see a lot of disruptions in marriages and relationships in March. And so it's kind of like this, it's like sometimes for healing to occur, disruption has to occur first. Okay. So if the disruption occurs in March, it could be because your system and the energy cycles of the earth are ready for us to heal that thing. It doesn't mean can you not work on your relationships in July? No, you absolutely can. But there's like this extra measure of grace and connectivity and just feelings of like opportunity. I guess you could say a window of opportunity where it's kind of like your results go a lot further, right? If that makes sense. Like a special season for it. In June, so these are around the equinoxes and the solstices, right? In June, it is the reconciliation with land. So if you had a trauma related to a specific location, whether maybe it's like your fifth grade classroom that you grew up in, like that um, it could be a time to reconcile that. September is typically a reconciliation with the Godhead figure in your life, whatever that looks like, no matter what your faith path is. But a reconciliation with kind of God and faith happens in that season. And then in December, it's more of a reconciliation with like destiny and purpose of like who you are and what you're supposed to walk out.
This is very cool.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about some of the things in my life where I've had a reckoning, if you will, and I was like, yep, had a pretty significant breakup in March. Yep. December, many years ago, I was like, I'm going to fix my finances. I'm finally going to get my stuff together and stop being an ostrich and keeping my head in the sand about these things. So, wow, this is lining up even unintentionally, Jessica.
Yeah. So you can look past and see your patterns and maybe see how these things either break down or heal, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
they break down to heal. But ultimately, like that's the general pattern. It doesn't mean that it won't. For me, I tend to notice patterns in years of 10. So I see like things. So now what I've started to do for me personally is in December, I will look through all of the pictures from 10 years ago. So in December of 2024, I sat down and looked at all the pictures from 2015.
What were
Because
you looking for? Like, what were you doing?
what happened in my life that year?
Okay.
I have seen 10-year patterns of school accomplishments, graduations. This is going to be crazy. In March or April of 2024, I went through this like experiential weekend. It's kind of like all these counseling like activities all in one weekend, like heal your life, do this amazing experience, take yourself to the next level. And I went through and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've done this before. I've done this exact same. I thought they copied it. Actually, it was so close. I was like, how long ago was it that I went through this program? Morgan, it was ridiculous. It was 10 years ago, almost to the exact month I went through it. So I've started to look back through my pictures and say, okay, what's going to reconcile itself this year? What's going to come back around? What topic might I deal with? And also, what pattern do I want to break? So instead of waiting for myself to heal that next thing through the next 10-year pattern, what do I want to heal sooner? What do I want to heal faster? We had a journey with infertility. I sort of mentioned that at the beginning. It was a 10-year journey down. And we had a miracle conception. And after all the treatments and the losses and the different things, but we always had a loss in January. And it just so happened the way we had our miracle conception, we had our delivery of our 3-year-old now 3 years ago in January. So there are some things that God in the universe just brings back around for you and heals for you, I think, and is participating in that desire and that hope and kind of like, I just trust that this is going to continue to heal itself and I'm going to be here for whatever iteration that looks like. But I've started to prep myself. Okay, if I know I have a 10-year pattern, let me look back at what's happened 10 years ago. What do I want to do differently this time? How do I want to heal it differently? And also, are there any other components that I need to pay attention to? Any other patterns? Every 3 years, this happens in my life, or every 5 years, or whatever. Is this if there's a specific issue that comes up? It could be, if you look back, is there a year pattern or is there a specific age pattern for you? Like, did something happen to you at 22 that also happened to your mom at 22 that might have happened to your grandmother at 22? That could be a generational pattern that in your family line at 22, this happens.
Interesting. Now, what about, as you were talking, I thought, wait a second, what about being preemptive? Because you're talking about looking back and looking for patterns or like, why is this coming out? I can think of something that happened in my life. This was 2020, and I had an abortion, and it was a very obviously traumatic experience. So it's like, are there things in your life where you're like, well, this is going to be a trauma? How do you preemptively start to go, if I don't start to work on this, talk about this, heal this, right this moment, this is going to show up, or I know this is obviously something that's going to be a trauma. How do I handle it? How do I positively start handling it immediately?
So here's the thing is there's no one thing that defines what could be a trauma. In fact, 100 women can have abortions and some will be traumatized by it and some won't.
Mm-hmm.
There's even such a thing that they look at as something called post-traumatic trauma growth. And so what changes the outcome for people is, one, the ability to regulate their body consistently, be able to talk about it or navigate through what they're thinking, feeling, and believing, express those emotions, and support. Support is really important. Finding people that can help you navigate through a sense of, if you experience something traumatic, even say tomorrow, heaven forbid something happens to you and you're like, this could be a big thing and I might be traumatized from this. You know, you talked about the guy with the motorcycle accident, for example. His ability to navigate forward, or the ability to have what we call even resilience, is anchored in by how much routine we can start to pick up and move towards after an incident, how much life, not bypassing the emotions, not bypassing what we're thinking and feeling and believing, but still engage in activities that cause us to move forward, but how much support we have. Honest, connective support that allows us to be vulnerable and helps us to get back to this idea of, what is our vision for us in our life and our future? How do we want to move forward? So we might have memories of the past. You know, you might have memories of the abortion, but you're not experiencing them in a painful way, and they haven't disrupted what you think, feel, and believe about yourself now. And you're not telling stories about the future. Oh, I can never have children because I had an abortion in the past. Don't project the story onto the future because of what you've experienced.
Yeah, I would say it was my second. One was in my 20s and one was at 40. And I mean, neither were fun and they were my decision. So I thought this was my decision. I had to first think about it very thoroughly beforehand and then make my decision and stay true to my decision. And so I didn't feel trauma, but I still think the experience is traumatic. Everything around it, the appointments prior, the appointment of the everything about it is traumatic. So it's really, to me, like you said, the support that hit home when you said that, I was like, yes, that and journaling. I'm a big journaler. I wrote a letter to the babies that I said, this was a really difficult decision and I'm sorry I made this decision and I really felt like I needed to. And so if that was for me to process the guilt I was feeling. So yeah, for me, it was, like you said, support system and processing it in my own way through journaling and writing a letter and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And still, like you said, the memories are still there. I've still, it's a terrible experience I would never want to experience again. You know, it's like, it's traumatic in its own way just because it is.
Yeah. So the real test for you, Morgan, will be when you get to be 60. And then you had 20 and 40. When you go to 60. My math is at the end of the day. When you get to be 60, noticing what you think and feel and believe about yourself at 60.
Yeah, that'll be interesting because it was 28, 40. Like I was, as you were talking, I was like, mine are kind of an 8-year windows.
Yeah. So what is your next 8 pattern of 8 coming up? When's your next cycle of 8 for you approaching? And what are you believing about yourself for that?
Sure. Yeah, you're making me really curious because I'm thinking about some of the things that have happened in my life, not necessarily even traumatic, but big decisions. Like whether it's like changing careers, changing geographic locations, like big ones, not just like I moved down the street, you know, but I'm curious. I kind of want to almost write everything out in a timeline.
Yeah, make a timeline. And then looking at what things are you attaching as belief systems about yourself? Are you doing things out of actions because you're avoiding? Or is it really like some people are meant to live lives that have a variety of experiences to them, have that flexibility and flow? It's not everything is from a trauma response, right? But am I running from things instead of facing them? Am I denying, acknowledging that This feels unsafe, uncomfortable. I don't want to talk about it. Let me just pretend it didn't happen and go over here. Like, we had some losses in our infertility journey that were traumatic to me because of the desire that we held was so deep, right? And I tell people the first one I did what every normal person does when they lose a baby. I went back to school for a master's degree. And I say that really jokingly, and for some people, they get really offended at it. But I say, like, it was a terrible coping mechanism. I decided to ignore everything I was thinking and feeling about it and what I was making it to mean about who I was as a human, as a woman, and as a potential mom. And I had to do the work around recognizing that, the trauma for me was every month, am I going to get a period or not? Am I pregnant or not? And my trauma pattern became, I used to take pregnancy tests to get my cycle to start. Like, that was my trauma pattern. Let me just go ahead and take this test, get it out of the way, even if I'm a day late, because I know my cycle will come, and let me just go do this. And it got to the point where, like, when I actually did become pregnant, I took the test as a trauma response because I was so many days late and my system had healed and I hadn't been late in a very long time. But I was like, well, here we go again. Like, I'm stressed out, must be late, blah, blah, blah. And in that time, it wasn't. I was pregnant. So what I said is, like, what are patterns of things we engage in, activities that we engage in? How are we trying to so many women want to bypass feeling. And they want to bypass feeling because they think it's going to be like Pandora's box and they're going to be like a puddle of goo on the floor and they're not going to be able to recover. And when I say, when it comes to those emotional things, getting it out, it's kind of like the roller coaster. The first big hill that you ride in a roller coaster is like literally the one where your stomach bottoms out and you think you're going to die. But after that, everything else is not nearly as intense. So allow yourself that big first expression if you haven't explored it. And after that, what comes is much smaller waves or much smaller versions of it, because we've said yes to ourselves to say, I deserve to release this emotion instead of holding it. But when we hold it, when we tell ourselves we can't feel, when we dismiss feelings that we do have because I had such and such good life growing up, blah, 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 all that storyline we tell ourselves, it will shut us down. And usually it shuts us down in our body with some kind of sickness or disease.
Is there a way for the women that are out there that are moms to help kiddos talk about this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think so 3 questions that help your kids once they calm down from the initial emotional expression. Because so often we want to say, stop crying, stop feeling, let them feel, even if you're uncomfortable with it, is what happened. Get them to tell the story of what happened once they have the initial calm down. What are you feeling? Like, what all things were you feeling? And what was the hardest part for you? Because what we perceive as hard for somebody is not often the hard thing for them. And so getting them to acknowledge, oh, it's okay that I felt angry about this, even though you think I should not be angry about it. We talk about the details. So we create boundary lines around vague things. We acknowledge what we're feeling, and we acknowledge what was hard or difficult. Now, as a fourth extension question, depending on the age or the scenario, you can always say, would you like help with that? And what do you need it to look like? Because so many times people don't, especially kids, they don't necessarily want help or resolution. They want a space to talk about it, feel the feelings, and not have parents say, well, why are you feeling that way? You have no reason to be sad. You have no reason to be depressed. If that was a storyline you heard growing up, your life is easy. You have nothing to be sad or depressed about. You probably have some traumas.
Honestly, as you were saying that, I think partners should be able to do that too.
Yeah.
Like, I can tell something's going on. You feel off, or your energy feels off. Like, tell me what happened, how you're feeling, where are you feeling it in your body?
And what's hard about that for you? When we listen to what people say and how they feel, we tend to automatically judge why that might be hard or not hard, why it should or shouldn't be hard. But if they can acknowledge why it's hard, And like, for example, if you and I were talking and you started, I said, what happened? Tell me what's going on. What are you feeling about that? And then I say, what's hard about that for you? Or what's the hardest part of that? What comes out of your mouth is so often not probably what I would have picked. I'm defining hard based on the context of my personal story, history, past experiences, my own narrative, and my thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. You're going to define hard by those same things in your life. So if I'm present enough to listen to what you say is hard, all of a sudden it brings a whole different context to how we heal and move forward because we've defined what the hard part is.
This, I want to like blast this out into the universe. I want everyone to listen, men, women, and children.
Share it with a friend, invite all your relatives.
It's so valuable. And we're all walking around, like you said, with injuries. And sometimes we're like, oh, it wasn't that bad. And it's like, it's okay. All of it hurt you. No matter how big or small it was, it hurt you.
It starts to, yes. And that's why it's important to acknowledge it and regulate around it. Because here's what I tell people. Okay, you can get a cut on your hand. And if you get a cut on your hand and you don't clean it, you don't wash it off, you don't put a Band-Aid on it or some Neosporin, and it gets dirty and infected because you're out digging around the garden and going to work and doing all these things. Every time you shower, you don't wash it off. Like, you conceal it. It's not that big of a deal. It's just a little cut, right? There will come a point in time where you're in the hospital and we need to cut your hand off because that cut got so infected it shut down your whole hand. And it's about to shut down your whole body. The point is a little acknowledgement goes a long way. A little care goes a long way. A little participation in your healing goes a long way. So dismissing this by like, it wasn't that big of a deal is like saying, it's just a little cut. I'm not going to take care of it.
And then it's gangrene.
Yeah. Yeah.
As you were talking, I'm thinking about when I was a therapist and my supervisor was telling me a story about a woman who had terrible sexual abuse from a father and then got into relationships where the men were abusive and never, ever, ever told her story.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, he said, if we don't get it out of your body, it's going to eat you alive. And I thought of the movie City Slickers, not to be funny, but at the same time, when he got bit by the snake and he's like, you got to get the poison out. And I feel like that with the trauma, it's like you said, it's an injury. It's something inside of us that if we don't get it out, if we don't take care of it, it's going to eat us alive in a not good way. So get it out. Like you said, that support system and restore it, or really take into account this whole thing went back to 4th grade when this one person said this thing, or these little girls didn't like what you brought to the table. And it's like, you're basing all these years later, decades later, someone's opinion that you don't even remember these girls' names. Wow. This was amazing. Jessica, where can people find you, like you, follow you, hire you to help them work through their trauma? Please tell me everything.
Yeah, social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook right now. Jessica Vibrant Hammock, both places. And I'm working on updating my website. So the easiest other way to reach me is email vibrantvoice20@gmail.com. So those are some places you can reach out, see some of the content, interface with me, and decide if you want to know more. I'm always happy to jump on a call and talk about some things. I will say this as a final thing, like, you're worth doing the work. You are worth healing. You're worth doing the work. You're worth exploring. Don't let the idea of what it might be like stand in the way of you doing the work, because you're worth doing it.
I was going to ask you for your motto in life or something you want to leave with the listener, and that was it. That was it. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Your Unapologetic Life. Be sure to share this episode with at least one woman in your life who could use a confidence boost. Don't forget to claim your free video training. It's called Bounce Back Quick, 5 confidence boosters after a breakup, by visiting morganbarkis.com and subscribing to my email list, or clicking the link in the show notes. Join me for more resources and learn how to book a discovery call to see if my 90-day coaching program is right for you. You've got this, girl. Let your unapologetic life begin.